Hi, I'm Chris from CodeReviewVideos.com, and in this video we're going to re-implement the pre-update event listener, this time with our test-driven approach. One of the discoveries that we made during our untested approach was that the name of Wallpaper Upload Listener was perhaps not that helpful. We shortened that to just be Wallpaper Listener, and it would be a good idea to update our tested implementation to match that approach. There are three files that we need to change to make this possible. First, we need to rename both the Wallpaper Upload Listener and the Wallpaper Upload Listener spec to remove the word upload. Renaming these files is straightforward enough, but we do need to make sure that we open both of these files and do a find replace on the word upload and replace that with an empty string. Lastly, we need to make sure that we update our Symfony service definition, again to remove the word upload. Finally, after making this change, we should rerun our test suite, and we can see that we still have 18 passing tests. Whilst we have our service definition open, we might as well add in the required entry for pre-update. And as we covered already in the untested approach, we already have the vast amount of logic that we need to make the update process work. Currently, that logic is stored inside the pre-persist method, and we'll need to extract that out. But before we get to that, one other thing that we found that happens during our untested approach was that the wallpaper upload process for the underlying file won't actually happen during an update form submission unless at least one other property of the wallpaper object changes also. This is because the file property of our wallpaper entity is not actually tracked by Doctrine, and as such any changes to it are not picked up by the entity manager. We found a fix to this problem by way of timestamps. During our untested approach, we just added some class properties of created at and updated at and the associated getters and setters directly to our wallpaper entity. But a better solution to this in the real world is to use a trait. Traits allow you to define little snippets of code that you can reuse in other classes. Typically this code is more general in nature and it's useful amongst several unrelated entities. Now a really great example of this is timestamps, where we may wish to have our categories timestamped and our wallpapers timestamped, but we don't want them to share the same base class just to share this timestampable set of properties. There's a couple of points worth addressing here. Firstly, note that we have to add in the ORM has lifecycle callbacks annotation to the class that's using the trait, not the trait itself. And also you may be wondering why inside our trait, we're inside a traits plural directory, but the entity is a singular name. And that's because trait is a reserved keyword in PHP. So if we try and use it like that, as you can see, PHP Storm is already giving us some visual feedback that what we're doing is most likely wrong. And if we try and use it like that, we will find that we're in an error state. Now in using this timestampable trait, we have made a change to our underlying entity structure. As note, when we use timestampable, both created at and updated at have some ORM annotation. Therefore, we need to go ahead and create ourselves a new migration. That looks okay. And if we check inside our project under Doctrine Migrations, we can see that one has been created. So now we need to apply it. So I'm just hitting the up arrow and changing diff to migrate. There's one final thing that we need to do before we get back to our wallpaper listener. We need to make sure that we call setUpdatedAt as part of our call to set file. This was something that we learned during our untested approach. Now typically I don't test getter and setter logic on my entities, and as such I don't have a PHP spec file created for our wallpaper entity. So I'm going to start by creating one. Now because the wallpaper entity already exists, when I go to run this spec, it should pass immediately. Now I'm not going to add in tests for every getter and setter, I'm just covering the interesting change, but as ever feel free to go a little bit further here if you feel the need to do so. I'm going to add a test here that checks that the updated at property is set to an instance of datetime whenever we set a file. This test will consist of 3 stages. First, we'll check that before we do anything, the updated at property is null. Next, we'll go ahead and call setFile, and for this we'll need something implementing the file interface, which we will mock, and we can check that this returns an instance of a wallpaper, and that's because setFile returns this. Now note here that I'm rearranging the code purely so it fits on the screen based on my small screen size. Finally, we will ask PHP spec to provide us with a mock of file interface, which we can pass into the call to set file. After calling set file, we should call get updated at again, and this time we we expect to return an instance of datetime. Now, as we haven't added an implementation yet, we should expect our tests to fail, which they do, and as we can see, we're expecting to get back that instance of datetime. We're currently getting back a null, and that's the call here, this get updated at is returning a null. So let's just add in a simple bit of implementation that we saw from our untested approach, where we simply call the set updated at, which doesn't take any arguments, but should satisfy the criteria of our tests, which it does. This takes care of all the small tasks. Now we have one bigger task. So I've gone ahead and opened up the wallpaper listener spec and the wallpaper listener. And what we need to do now is pretty much repeat these two tests, but for our pre-update function. So I'm going to start off by taking a full copy of this one and then just popping it below it can pre-persist. We'll come back to the it can pre-update in a moment. One interesting thing is that pre-update event args are slightly different than the lifecycle event args, so I just need to change that. And I'm also going to change this here from saying pre-persist to pre-update. Simply changing the method name is going to stop the problem that PHP Storm was reporting there about a duplicate method name. And we're going to want to change pre-persist to pre-update. Aside from that, everything else should be the same. Likewise, the test for pre-update is going to be almost entirely the same as pre-persist. So we're going to need that file interface to satisfy this test. So let's drop that down and add in file interface. And likewise here, we're going to want to call pre-update instead of pre-persist. But aside from that, the rest of this test is going to be pretty much identical. So let's just run our tests now and see where we get. I'll just do all the tests in the event directory. We can see we got 2 failing tests, and that's expected because we don't yet have an implementation for pre-update. So the implementation I'm going to go with is entirely in line with what we went with during our untested approach. It's going to have a method called upload, which is private. It's going to get given an entity, and pretty much all of this here that we covered before is going to be extracted out from pre-persist, put into our upload, and then both of these need to be updated to call upload. In fact, I will return this upload, and the entity in this case is going to come from event args get entity. Likewise, should be able to do the same thing here. And even though we've made quite a big change there, because we've got tests, we can guarantee that what we've done has not broken anything. It might be worthwhile also running the tests across the whole project at this point. That's looking pretty good. So how you feel about the duplication inside the test suite is a matter of personal preference. Because we've only got pre-persist and pre-update, and we're only really repeating that set of test logic twice, I'm not overly concerned about it at this point. If we had 3, 4, 5 methods all using the same logic, then maybe I would start to think about refactoring that. Of course, your opinion may differ, and that's entirely okay too. So at this point, we have a tested working wallpaper create and update facility. There's still a little bit more work that we need to do to bring ourselves up to parity with the untested approach. So we'll carry on with this in the very next video.